Chapter 20, bitches! In which the Newsies have a rally. Yeah! Fun! The commotion outside Irving Hall on the night of the Newsies strike rally was something to behold. Jack, David, and Spot Conlon stood at the door welcoming these boys from all over the city. Many boisterous greetings were exchanged, and so many spit-sealed handshakes that it was a wonder that an epidemic did not break out from all the germs that had been passed out. This is how the fuck... Zombies. That's all I'm saying about this. Zombies. Although they had invited reporters from all the big newspapers, Brian Denton of the New York Sun, because we have to know this 50,000 fucking times while reading this book, was the only one to show. He declined the front row seat they had saved for him, explaining that since he was working, he would rather roam the hall in order to better take in the whole event. Inside the theater, the boys had filled every seat, and a number of the thinner, smaller boys had crowded 2 in each seat. Others were sitting in the aisles or perched precariously on the balcony railing, like our good friend Kid Blink, who has no fear of falling off balconies, apparently. They were everywhere except hanging from the huge crystal chandelier, which I'm sure Kid Blink would have done if he had the chance. Which they probably would have done had they figured out a way to gain necessary altitude. Maybe Bumlets would have done it too, but apparently Bumlets doesn't exist in this book because I've never once said his name. Poor Dominic. The pit band struck up a sprightly tune. The audience broke into a cheer as Jack and David came running down the aisle and leapt on stage to get married. Jack raised his hands for silence and shouted, "Carrying the banner!" The audience roared back at him, "Carrying the banner!" so loud that the chandelier shook from the volume, and which means Blink or Bumlets would have fallen off anyway. There was no way they could have heard the clatter of horses' hooves on cobblestones heading in their direction. "We've come a long way," Jack shouted, "but we ain't there yet. It's only going to get tougher from now on, and that means we got to get tougher too." The crowd roared its approval. "But we got to get smarter too," Jack said, qualifying himself. "That's why we got to listen to my pal Davy and stop beating up the scabs." Responses from the audience made it apparent that this sentiment was less popular than the first. The language of fists and stones was one the Newsies understood well, and while that of appeasement and negotiation was news to them. So basically, if they say guns, they say guns. If they say blades, they say blades. Okay, cool. Just so we make this very clear. Spot Conlon, sitting in the front row, jumped up and shouted, "Any scab I see, I soak him, period," because you're not on the stage in this time. He wasn't on the stage. Poor Spot. I think it's because he's a ginger with a bowler hat. "That's just what they want you to do," David shouted back. "Then they can see we're just thugs. If we behave like them, we're going to turn into them. That's how it works." "I don't care," Spot shouted back. "I'm a honey badger. Some of us just ain't made to take it. I say anybody hurts us, we hurt them worse. Who's with me?" The audience divided into 2 factions and began debating the issue among themselves. Within moments, tempers grew hot and fistfights began breaking out all over the hall. This is not Disney approved. David and Jack looked at each other in dismay. How could everybody ruin their wedding like this? If they didn't do something immediately, the rally would turn into a free-for-all. Ooh, as it should. "Go ahead," Jack said. "Fight each other. That's just what polished our hearts and the rest of them want us to prove. We're street rats with no brains and no respect for nothing, including ourselves." The Newsies stopped fighting and listened. "Here's how it is," Jack went on. "We don't stick together with nothing." He looked down at Spot Conlon. "What's it going to be, Spot? Do we stick together? Do we fight as one?" Spot opened his mouth. "I say," he looked around at the crowd, at their expectant faces. Then he turned back to Jack. "I say what you say. I say." I do not like that.
That's slightly different. I don't like it.
I do not like anything in this book. I don't think I can express this clear enough how much I do not like this book. He jumped up on stage and spit-sealed a handshake with Jack and David. Wow. A 3-way handshake. That's awesome. Like 3 different spits. Yeah, hot. At that very moment, the pit band began to play an upbeat number, and the curtain rose, revealing Meta, the Swedish meadowlark, in a dazzling white-beaded gown and a featherhead hat. Perhaps if the band hadn't played so loud and the boys hadn't whistled, stomped, and cheered so raucously, they might have heard the clip-clop of horses' hooves as the mounted police circled the front of the theater, because we live in Canada now, or the clatter of wheels as a paddy wagon pulled up with another load of policemen, or the clanking of chains and clubs as Pulitzer's private army clambered down from still another wagon. They might have heard Wiesel, Snyder, and the Delancey brothers muttering among themselves about what they would do when they got their hands on certain individuals named Jacobs and Kelly. Meanwhile, inside Irving Hall, the Newsies were following Spot's example, climbing up on stage and joining the chorus line. Jack gave Sarah a hand up, and she joined the line too, glancing over at him with eyes that sparkled with happiness. Yay! David, dancing on the other side of her, had no suspicion that anything was amiss. Not until he noticed Snyder, standing at the rear of the theater, raising a shiny brass police whistle to his lips. And by then it was too late. At the scream of the whistle, pandemonium broke loose. Police charged in from every door, all of them heading for Jack. Jack leapt off the stage and into the arms of a dozen newsboys. They caught him and propelled him on his way past all the hands that were grabbing for him out the front door. So he was stage diving, essentially. First crowd surfer ever in history. He could taste freedom. But when he emerged into the night, he found himself surrounded by a half circle of mounted cops, as well as Pulitzer's hired thugs. With no other choice, he ducked back inside. Dodging cops on either side, he ran down the aisle straight into the arms of Nigel Snyder, who was waiting to grab him at the foot of the stage so they could get married. Snyder would have had him, but David leapt down from the stage onto Snyder's back and rode him around the theater like a wild bronco. Oh my God!
Don't hurt my Jack.
You leave my Jack alone! One of the cops pulled David off and threw him to the floor. Sarah screamed, and Les ran over to the cop and kicked him on the calf. On the calf, not like in the calf. I'd be like, I'm kicking you in the calf, like on, whatever. The cop howled in agony. By now, Wiesel, the Delancey brothers, and the rest of the thugs had joined the fray, clubs and chains swinging. The Newsies tried to escape, but at every exit they were met by a new mob. Denton stepped in to stop Kid Blink from getting clubbed and got cracked on the head himself. He staggered and fell, blood flowing down his face. Oh my God! That's horrible! Poor Brian Dutton, man. David, fearing for the life of his sister and little brother, dragged them out next to under the stairway. The cops would have stopped them, but they were too busy backing Jack up onto the stage. He was hoping to flee into the wings, but when he turned, he saw Wiesel and the Delancey brothers blocking his path. There was no way out. Even though they were armed and he was not, Jack was about to take them all on, when suddenly a hole opened in the stage, swallowing his pursuers. It took Jack a moment to figure out what had happened. Spot, Racetrack, and Boots, standing in the wings, had pushed a lever opening a trap door. It was the same device used by magicians to make their beautiful assistants disappear. But didn't Davy just take everybody else under the stage? So they're kind of fucked. They're all kind of fucked. Like, another wave of cops was coming at Jack. "Hey, Jack!" Racetrack shouted. "Curtain going up!" Racetrack and Boots started pulling like mad at the ropes that raised the fire curtain. Jack grabbed the edge of the curtain and went sailing into the air just as the police reached him because he's motherfucking Batman. They grabbed for him, but all they got was a shoe.
Just got the whole Jack is Batman thing.
As he rose, he raised a fist like some kind of avenging angel and shouted, "Carry in the banner!" inspiring all the Newsies who hadn't yet caught to cheer and fight harder than ever. Just then, Wiesel, clambering out of the pit beneath the stage, saw Jack getting carried away and hurled his cudgel. What the fuck is a cudgel? I'm assuming it's a club. Something very violent. It flew through the air, end over end, and hit the newsboy on his side. Ow. He lost his grip and plummeted to the stage. Within seconds, a sea of blue uniforms swept him away. Chapter 21? Whatever, this one's like 2 pages. In which the Newsies confront Judge Movealong Monahan. Judge Movealong Monahan was clearly bored by the task at hand. He kept looking at his gold pocket watch, drumming his fingers on the bench, and gazing out the window like a schoolboy waiting for the 3 o'clock bell. A row of Newsies, including Spot Conlon, Racetrack Boots, and Kid Blink. This guy's really redundant. Stood before him, bandaged in black and blue, awaiting his verdict. David stood at the back of the courtroom watching the Newsies stand trial and feeling both guilty and relieved he was not among them. "You don't have to get arrested to be a loyal friend," Sarah reassured him over and over, but his feelings were still mixed. "Are any of you represented by counsel?" the judge asked. They shook their heads. "Good," the judge said. "That should move things along considerably." Spot Conlon spoke up. "Judge Movealong, Your Honor, I object." "On what grounds?" The judge
grounds of Brooklyn, Your Honor.
On the grounds of Brooklyn, Your Honor. The other Newsies congratulated Spot on his intricate legal maneuver, but Movealong seemed unimpressed. David simply stood there silently, dying with shame. "I fine you each $5 or 2 weeks confinement and $5, Racetrack gasped. "I ain't even got 5 cents. "I'll pay the fine," said a voice from the back of the courtroom. Everybody turned, and there was Brian Dutton with a bandage wrapped neatly around his head, but other than that, looking no worse for wear. Pay the clerk, Movealong said. Next. The Newsies gathered around Denton, thanking him and slapping him on the back. Yeah, the guy's fucking hurt and you're gonna slap him on the back? That's like, ow. Whatever. There was no question that he was the man of the hour. Before you make me the hero, Denton said, I've got some bad news. He broke off with a gasp because just then the bailiff appeared leading Jack to the bench. His face was bruised and swollen and he could hardly open his left eye. Hiya, fellas, Jack called to them brightly. Hey, Denton. Guess we made the papers this time. How'd my picture look? None of the papers covered the rally, Denton said. Not even the Sun. What? Jack said. Said? Wouldn't it asked? Like, inquired? Gasped? Said with a quizzitive look on his face. Just said. Said. For an instant, the jauntiness was gone, and he looked like a frightened little boy. But how? Why? Denton couldn't bear to tell him. He turned and rushed from the courtroom. Wow. Case of Jack Kelly, the bailiff began, reading from the schedule. Inciting to riot, assault, resisting arrest. If I might address the bench, the voice belonged to a figure in a dark coat and top hat. Move it along, Warden Snyder, the judge said. Snyder walked to the front of the courtroom, his head bent with humility. The boy's real name is Francis Sullivan, mother deceased, father a convict in the state penitentiary. The Newsies were stunned. Jack avoided their eyes. But what about Santa Fe? David whispered to himself. He is currently a fugitive from the House of Refuge, Snyder continued, where his original sentence of 3 months for theft was extended to 6 months for unruly behavior. Yeah, Jack interrupted, like demanding a square meal. Followed by an additional 6 months for attempted escape. It wasn't no attempt, Snyder. Me and Tody Roosevelt waved bye-bye. I therefore asked that he be returned to the House of Refuge. For my own good, right? Jack shouted at the judge. And for what, Snyder kicks back to you? Snyder ignored Jack's outburst. I suggest the court order his incarceration until the age of 21 in the hope that we may guide him to abandon his criminal ways and become a useful and productive member of society. That's not fair, David shouted. You can't do that. The other Newsies joined the chorus, to no avail. Monahan banged his gavel for silence and declared, so ordered. Next!